Hello, today we're here for the Roaring Fork Veterans History Project interview with Virgil Simon, and my name is Corby Anderson, and I'm here at the studios of GrassRoots Television in Aspen, Colorado. Today is Tuesday, June 5th, and it's about 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Virgil, thanks for joining us.
Hello, Corby. Glad to be here.
Virgil, we're going to go back into your life and discuss the many twists and turns that it's taken.
This is your life kind of thing?
This is your life. and in particular, this is a Veterans History Project that will end up at the Library of Congress for viewing forever, theoretically, for history infinitum. So,
great project.
Yes, we're happy to have you here. And we'd like to be sure to thank the sponsors of our local collection of these interviews, which would be the great ladies at the Aspen Thrift Shop and the amazing people at the Aspen Elks Lodge, and of course our partners with Aspen Historical Society. And I'd really like to give a big thank you to Colonel Dick Merritt for helping set this up, and of course Daryl Grobe and Kip Hubbard also. Virgil, you were born April 11th, 1925 in Gypsum, Kansas.
Right.
And tell me who your parents were.
My father was Chester Marion Stiefel, and my mother was Anna Bertha Cora Simon Stiefel. She was known as Bertie Stiefel after marriage.
Bertie.
Right, Bertie.
And you had an interesting experience early on in your childhood, which I think shaped the rest of your life, which I think is something, it's in our linear timeline of your life. I think we probably jump right into this.
Well,
tell me what happened when you were 2 years old.
We start with, when I was 2.5, I was living on the farm in Kansas, near Gypsum, Kansas, which was a farm community. And at that time, I had 3 brothers and 1 sister. I was the last child to be born, and I know nothing about that, but at the age of 2.5, my mother died, and I guess there was quite a strain in the family at the time, and my Aunt Emma Simon, who was the sister of my mother, was out there at the time, and whatever happened, I went back to live with my Aunt Emma Simon in Burlington, Iowa, and she had never married, so it was just the 2 of us, and she acted as my mother throughout all of my early life through high school. She was really devoted to me, and I was devoted to her. She was just like my mother, and I knew nothing about my family. For some reason, we were not aware of my brothers and the other side of the Stiefel, for there was no contact made. So I was basically brought up with my aunt, not knowing about my earlier family until much later. Did she
ever tell you what happened exactly?
It's been sort of a garbled, nothing definitive. I never was really told exactly what happened, and
Sounds like brothers and sisters.
Well, I know one thing, that my father, with all the children at that time, and I was the youngest one, my sister Norma was, maybe 8, 9 at that time, and she ended up taking care of all the other brothers and so forth, so it was a real challenge for the family, and I think I was taken away to live with my aunt just because of the stress and what happened in the family at that time.
This would be right around the era of the Depression, I believe.
Right.
And it had to be tough times.
It was. We were very poor.
Did you ever find out what your dad's profession was?
He was a farmer. But he also worked for the railroad before that, but he had a farm out in Gypsum, Kansas. In fact, later on I went to see the family homestead, see where I was born and so forth.
And your
time.
Aunt Emma, what were her interests? What was her profession?
Well, she never married, and she took in washing and things like odd jobs and cleaning. She never had a real profession. She was devoted to me and encouraged my artwork, which I started at an early age. I started drawing my toys at 5 instead of playing with them. We had some cast iron tractors and stuff, and I had to go back and see some sketches that I made of the tractor with wheels in perspective and so forth. So I started drawing, and she encouraged me throughout my career.
Was she an artist that you know of?
No.
Interesting. So tell me about your maybe your teenage years, early teens.
Well, in Burlington, we had a very wonderful school program, and I was particularly interested in the art and music programs, of course, and I had several art teachers that I remember very well. We didn't have a huge program. The music program was actually the most professional, and we had in high school we had an orchestra of symphony orchestra of 110 chairs or people playing in it, which was sort of incredible.
That is.
We also had a choral program that we gave operettas. I was in Pirates of Penzance and Yeoman of the Guard, Gilbert and Sullivan stuff, and that's where I met my wife, Joan Eisenhart, who was a great bass viol player. She was much better than I was, but we played bass viol next to each other in the high school symphony orchestra, and that's where we met. And
what age?
Well, that was in the early high school years. I didn't know much about her in junior high, but that's where we started, and we were also in the operettas together. She was a terrific contralto soloist, and I was a so-so bass, but we had a lot of fun in high school. High school was really a nice atmosphere. But
it was leading up to a war.
Right.
Right.
During that time, the high school years too, that's when my wife's brothers and sisters all went away to the war, and I didn't know about my brothers at that time, but my wife's brother Bob went away to the South Pacific, and he was a bombardier navigator, and her brother Bill was on a destroyer in the North Sea for a long time in the early years. And then started keying in with this stuff. At this time, my sister Norma decided that she wanted to find out about what had happened to me, Virgil, because she'd sent some letters to my aunt, but we never corresponded. So one day she got on a train or a bus and came to visit me while I was still in high school, and she stayed with us for a little while, and I got then to catch up a little bit on what happened in my family life, which was my brothers and sisters, and I found out that one brother was in the Army he was a veterinarian by profession, so he was as a meat inspector for the Army. And the other brother, Larry, ended up in the infantry. He was a captain in the infantry. So I began writing to these two brothers, and I got some correspondence back before I went into the service. And I remember on Larry's, he was in a certain company number that I remembered, so that when I was over in the Philippines and finally in Manila, maybe I'm getting ahead of my story.
Yeah, I think we'll.
But anyway,
catch up to
I
the
met
story.
him. I met him in Manila, the Philippines, at that time. So we'll get into that later. So that was where I started getting back, knowing about my family.
So let's go back to maybe the final years of your high school. Tell me maybe who the most important sort of mentors, if you remember them, for art and music.
Well, I had in my latter days of the art classes, there was a lady by the name of Catherine Hawkins who was very inspirational, and she followed me through my career and when I ended up in Chicago sometime. But she was a very wonderful instructor, and then we had another one, Kurt Lowenroth, and another teacher during that period who I remember quite well. I can't remember his name quite well, but I had three art instructors that were very instrumental in helping me. But basically I was pretty well self-taught. The other.
Were you doing art in your off time at home? Were you painting?
Oh yeah,
drawing,
I painted and drawn and
sculpting,
sketched. And I did
just about
sculpture. I
everything?
did everything, and had a lot of interests, art and music, and took voice lessons and bass. And then I also had a passion for model airplanes, and I designed and built model airplanes, and didn't build the kits, but I designed them myself, and I'd go out with the boys to fly at the airport. And later on, that influenced what I did in Manila a little bit.
Okay, so tell me about the build-up to war, to America joining the war, I guess, because you would have been in high school knowing that this was building, and that
Right.
you were the age that you'd probably have to be involved with it.
Right.
What were your, like, maybe your senior year of high school like?
Well, we knew that we were going to be drafted or enlisted, and I didn't have a real desire to enlist and go in. That's how you got into the Navy and some of the other specialized services. But somehow I didn't. I guess maybe because I couldn't swim at that time or anything. but I just decided to let the draft happen and showed my artwork and see what happens. So I was actually drafted from the high school and after the senior year.
Did you consider yourself in talking, you'd said you'd never shot a gun before you went to the military. Did you consider yourself a pacifist or anything like that at the time, or
I
were you willing to join the cause?
I was willing to join the cause because there was no question that this was the most horrible thing that was happening to the world, and I wanted to be a part of it too. And in those days, everyone was involved. The people that were left home, the wives and mothers, there was rationing going on. This was, everybody felt the effort of the war and heard about the atrocities and that stuff. So it was a cause that I felt very willing to go and be a part of, whatever would happen.
Interesting. And tell me about being drafted.
Well, drafted.
A letter come to your house?
Oh yeah, a letter comes to the house, and your number is there. You didn't know when it was going to happen. Then you had to report. This particular case, I had to go up to Des Moines and was enlisted there and was drafted at that time. But the interesting thing about that, when I left, the night that before I left on the bus to go to Des Moines to be drafted into the Army, my wife was, let me show you here. I did a watercolor sketch of her that night before we left, and she was a seamstress, and she did the gown herself. And this was my going away thought the night before I left to go to the war. And this particular deal was one that I did later of myself. It's a self-portrait of what I looked like at that time in the uniform.
Devil. Look at that.
A little different than now, and this was a watercolor sketch I did of her just a little bit before I went into the service. So those three are sort of in that time period.
She looks strikingly like the actress Uma Thurman to me.
Really?
It's interesting.
She's a great gal. We were only 18 and 19 at that time. So I was 19, she was 18.
That's great work.
Thank you.
And so you took the time on your last day before you reporting to the machine, basically, to draw a picture of her in her dress.
Right.
Well, how long did that take? An hour?
That particular watercolor was about an hour a sketch. A lot of the sketches I did at that time would take a half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. It was not a lengthy period. It's not like doing an oil, but this was a watercolor. Oh, there we are. But anyway.
Okay, so you're drafted. You say goodbye to your fiancée at that time? Or
fiancée.
Did you? Right. When did you ask her the big question?
Well, the big, we talked about getting married, so we were engaged, and what happened was that I was shipped off to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, to begin basic training, and after completing the basic training on the first furlough home, we talked about getting married, and we got permission from her father, who was an interesting story too. He'd been in Naval Reserve for a long time, and he was called up, and he became a lieutenant commander in the Naval Dentist Corps, and he was going to the service about 2 weeks after I was called. So he was at home at the time that we finally had our wedding, but we had about a week and a half notice when I was going to come home, so they had to scramble to get the wedding all prepared.
Wow.
And at that time, the rationing was full bore, and no one had enough sugar or flour and those kind of things to make a cake, so everybody pooled their resources together to be able to come up with a wedding cake. And it was quite an event because it was a huge turnout at one of the big churches in Burlington. Everybody came out, and but none of her brothers were there, of course, and I had 4F Buddy as my best man who was there, and she had some friends that were at home, but most of the men were all gone. And so it was a small wedding party. But the other thing that was unusual is that in this day and age where you get these tremendous photo albums of weddings, the silver nitrate was in ration supply, and I even worked as a retoucher for a photo shop in Burlington, and I thought he could help me, but he could only give us 2 black and white pictures of the entire wedding.
Wow.
So one of those is here. So this is what we looked at that time. So that was one of the pictures. I couldn't find the other one to show you, but it had just a few of the wedding party, but we had nothing of her father or mother or anybody else. So it was strange times.
And how long after that photo was taken, your wedding day, did you get sent back to Aberdeen?
Oh, we only had a week. It was only a week. We went for a quick honeymoon in Chicago. She had a grandmother who lived in Chicago in an apartment, and we spent a week there, and then I shipped back to Aberdeen Proving Ground and finished some training there.
So tell me about your time in Aberdeen. You were joined up with the Army. What was what was the group that you joined up with?
It was it was called the 618th Base Ordnance, Army. It was 618th Ordnance Base Army Maintenance outfit, specialized training for servicing all of the planes and trucks, not planes, I'm sorry, it's not aviation, but all the moving vehicles and guns and everything that the ordnance used in the Army, munitions and so forth. And my training was specifically to the sign department and to that kind of activity for the Army. So I got my training in sign painting and all kinds of other painting in Aberdeen Proving Ground, and worked there for a time before it was shipped off, but not the fighting part. Although the basic training was, you had the crawling under the live ammunition kind of stuff and all the heavy stuff, and I was a real small person that time, about 115 pounds, 10 pounds, and carrying those heavy sacks, it was a real strain, but I got through it. But I was glad when basic training ended.
Did you get any special awards or anything, or medals
for
finishing?
During that time, nothing particularly in the Army, but at that time, that particular painting over there, I've decided, that was my impression. It's an impression.
We're looking here?
Yeah,
okay.
That watercolor there, I entered when I was in Aberdeen Proving Ground into a national contest for soldiers, and it ended up being selected as one of, it was open to all over the United States. They had thousands of entries, but they picked 215 to be exhibited at the Mellon Art Gallery in Washington, D.C., and they printed a book, and this is just the cover and the other copy to it, but it was a book with all of the works of art, and that particular piece hung in Washington for a better part of a year.
Is that a private house or a rail yard?
No, it was purely imaginative. It was my impressions when I was shipped from Burlington, Iowa, my first trip through the mountains. I had never traveled anywhere from Burlington.
Interesting.
We had no car. It was my exposure to the outside world, and this was a definite impression I got going through the coal mining communities of Pennsylvania. So someplace in my foot locker in Aberdeen Proving Ground in my spare time, I did the watercolor painting to enter. So that was one of the things that happened at Aberdeen.
So you're trained as an artist, or you already had artistic skills,
Right.
and the Army saw that in you and had a need,
Right.
and you must have felt relieved in some way that you weren't going through infantry training.
It was a big benefit that I was able to take care of, that I was glad that they at least found a place where, at first they said, oh, you're going to go to the camouflage corps because of all the patterns and things. So that wasn't quite that, but I did do a lot of sign work, and I also had done some sign work as a job while I was in high school. I painted signs for a sign company, so I had some experience doing it.
How many signs would you work on a typical day?
Oh, Lord.
What kind of signs?
Well, this was a huge base, Army base, and this is, I don't have many shots of it, but it was a typical training center, and we had barracks and mess halls. We had many mess halls on the base. It was a big battalion arrangement. So they employed our sign shop to not only do signs, but to decorate the various quarters, mess halls and official buildings. We did some large eagles over where the cooking was being, or where the serving was being done, and I painted a lot of drawing objects like jeeps and track guns and that kind of thing that we hung on the wall, besides doing signs, and we did posters for some of the events on the base. It was a pretty active time.
Did you work for any particular commanders or have some other artists that were in your, well, artist soldiers, I guess you guys were, that? Yeah,
we had a group there that were basically had artistic experience in previous life before the service. And one thing happened that was rather strange. We had a colonel that saw, I had done some exhibits there on the base, and he saw my work and decided that he asked me if I would come to his house off base and do a portrait. And I'd done a lot of oils and stuff there, and I thought I was probably going to go to his house to do a portrait of his wife. And I got there, and it was a portrait of his Springer Spaniel. So I did a portrait of his dog. I have a drawing here someplace. Yeah, here it is. That was a sketch that I did before I did the painting. But that was the beginning of a sketch for the colonel. Outside of that was sort of unusual.
So, how long were you in Aberdeen?
Well, let's see. It was over a year. I was, I'm trying to see my notes here. I was in the United States for a year and 7 months. Most of that was in Aberdeen, and after the specialized training, we were shipped, our battalion was shipped to get ready to go overseas to a base in Texarkana, Texas. And that was the next move after Aberdeen. And this is a sketch or a watercolor that I did. That's of the USO, where I forgot to tell you, I was fortunate enough to have my wife come to visit me in Aberdeen once after we were married and once at Christmas before I shipped to Texarkana. And when we were there, she came to visit me, and we played a lot of ping pong in that USO. We were both pretty young, but that was about all there was to do at the base. So we did get to see each other at Texarkana before I shipped out to San Francisco and then overseas.
Did you find your time there to be pleasant or intense or strained? Did you have any accidents or anything that would have been? It was
a lot of hard work, because physically it was very demanding, going on a lot of forced marches and overnight camping out for a week and all that. So it was a physical. Even though you were through with basic training, you still had to do the usual Army duties as well as painting signs and doing the other stuff. I didn't do much sign work at Texarkana. That was not that kind of place, but I had a real funny experience that happened to me at Aberdeen Proving Ground that maybe now is the time to tell about before we get. Aberdeen was a huge base. I don't know how many thousand they had working there, but it was you got ready for inspection when the generals and the colonels and all the high brass would come through, and you'd parade march, you know, for a week getting ready this thing, getting everything spick and span and polished. They'd come through with their white gloves and do all of the checking of the soldiers. And this one particular day, the big event was taking place. All the generals were coming through, and we had our sign shop that we cleaned up real well. We took out all the spare paint and stuff, and we were working on the paint and the signs that time to be busy, look like we knew what we were doing. And they decided to send me out for some paint at a storehouse just about a half a block outside the building where we stored everything. And I hadn't been in this building before, so when I went out there, they told me what they wanted. So I looked in, and there were all these huge drums of paint all over the floor and along the walls, and there up on the shelf was the stuff that I needed to get. And I didn't think anything of it. I stood up on one of these big drums of paint, and as I was reaching for this thing, all of a sudden it was like a plunger. I fell right through. It was like a plunger, and the cream paint showered all over the room, over the walls. I was standing in this cream paint. It was like a Hollywood set. The door opened at that time. The generals came, "What are you doing there, soldier?" And then they slammed the door shut and started laughing. And I started laughing about it because it was so ridiculous that this was something I'll never forget. That was the end of my day. I had to go change my long johns and everything else, but it was like a Hollywood movie script, that it couldn't have been timed any more beautifully. At that instant, they opened the door. So
I bet you've avoided
I don't know if that's why I went
paint.
overseas or not, but
right, yeah, not long after that.
not long after that.
I bet you've avoided cream paint
Oh yes,
for the rest of your
yeah, I don't like cream paint.
What timing?
Yeah, it was something.
Okay, let's get you to overseas, I guess.
All right.
Tell me about leaving, I guess it would have been Texarkana.
Yeah, we left, we took a train trip across the states. Of course, I did a lot of sketches. I don't have anything to show you here on it, but I sketched the whole time. I sketched every place that I went. Landed in San Francisco and was there for just a few days, and we loaded on big troop ships. And I think there must have been 2 or 3 troop ships in this convoy. And all we knew is that we were going to go to the South Pacific, but since we had no destroyer protection or other battleships or anything with us, we went the southern route, way below the equator and around, and we found out later as we were out there that we were headed for the Philippines. But we avoided the subs and all the other dangers by going the southern route, but it took a whole month and a couple of days to get there. And it was beastly hot. I've never been so hot and humid in my life. It was, and we were crammed on quarters. That it was quite an experience. But to forget about it all, I did an awful lot of sketching. I did a lot of portraits of different people on board ship, and I guess that's where I ought to probably start showing some of those.
Do you recall the name of the ship?
No, I sure don't. Here are a few of the ship pictures.
Let's go slowly here.
Okay, this one
you
is.
might be able to put one.
It
up
had a.
you could put one up above here.
Up here.
Yeah.
Okay. It had some armament on the ship, but nothing really. Is this a better place to look at it than down here?
I think maybe one in each spot.
Okay. This is somebody getting a haircut on board ship, and you can see the bunks 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's just about that much space in between. It was very hot and stifling, and when somebody would leave, then they'd crank one up to get a little space to sit down. But those were our quarters for most of the time, just really packed in, and it was terribly, terribly hot. So, but
did you have any difficulties on the way out? Like other than hot, did you have bad weather? Did you?
There weren't any
alarms?
major storms that I remember, but there were some scares where we thought that we had to go on quarters and be ready to ditch. They thought there was some submarines sighted and so forth, but it didn't materialize.
How did that feel?
Well, it was a little scary. I I wanted to get over and do the job before getting sunk.
And had you come to any kind of psychological terms with your task and the possible fate that could await you at any
Well, you're
moment?
always hopeful, and when you're young, you don't believe it's going to happen to you, kind of thing. But I was very into doing my part in the cause. It was a terrible time in the world, and I felt that we were doing the right thing, and the whole country was in back of it. The people at home, there was not the division that you see now, or the wavering between what to do.
This was pretty much everyone aboard.
Oh yeah, everyone was.
Did you consider death ever? Did you?
We thought a little bit about it, but of course my goal was to get back to see my wife again, and everything I tried to do is be careful to do that. But we were fortunate. I wasn't in the combat stuff like so many of the interviews you've had that are just incredible. That people have really
It's amazing
gave
what
their life to
this community
protect
holds
it.
as far as the people
Yeah.
that came.
But I was fortunate. I didn't experience that kind of threat. But these are all pictures that I did, very fast sketches of.
Who was your inspiration for these types of painting drawings? Was there someone who was doing this type of work as well, or?
No, I had
Just your own
seen
style?
I had seen very little of work that artists in the service had done at that time. That's why that's not related to the service at all. It was my impression going through the States, and as I got into the service, it was just natural to me that I did that instead of using a camera. And these sketches would maybe be at 20 minutes, half an hour at the most. So we could turn out, here's a...
Would you do a quick sketch and then go back and fill it in?
No.
You would actually do the whole thing?
The whole thing as you go. It's just a quick
barber.
reaction. So
haircut on deck.
Haircut on deck, yeah. That was up... sometimes when there was no danger around, they thought we were safe, they'd allow the GIs, as many as could, get up on deck and be somewhat cool rather than the hot hole below, and so the hair cutting moved up there rather than when I showed you the first one. But
what were the types of things that you would do on this ship other than draw? It looks like people talk, they're playing cards.
Well, here's one. This was, I didn't sketch that from real life, but this is what I saw all the time. There were so many people that played cards and crap and did that kind of activity, which I didn't do at that time. But this is a scene at night in the moonlight, and taking your clothes off, going up on deck and playing cards, which was what a lot of the GIs did. I didn't play cards. We got rations of beer and cigarettes, and at that time, at 19, I didn't smoke or drink, so I'd sell my rations to other people. But I made a few bucks by doing portraits of all the people on board, and so I had a whole long line of people waiting for portraits.
And then they'd send those back home?
They'd send them back home, yeah.
Now,
so
these soldiers on this ship were, not all of them were artists, so
no,
they were going off to fight the Japanese.
Right. Oh yeah, it was a combination of our battalion, which was ordnance, and then some other services too. I don't think the ship was exclusively ours.
What time was this? What year?
This is 44.
Okay.
45.
So the war had been raging for about a year at that point, I think, right? 2 years?
44, let's see.
Pacific War?
I landed in, I departed San Francisco April 11th, 1945, which was a great date because that was my birthday. So my birthday present was to get on the ship and go to, we didn't know where we were going, but when we got closer, that was an interesting thing because we experienced VE Day in Europe, which happened on May 8th in 1945. So we thought, gee whiz, at least finally the war is turning in the right direction. So that was a big bonus. Everybody was celebrating, but we arrived in Manila on 13th of May, shortly after that. So as we were coming into Manila Bay, I remember we sailed past the famous Corregidor and Bataan Death March areas. It's right at the point of the harbor as you sail in past them, so we could see that in the distance. And When we landed in Manila Bay, we found that General MacArthur had been there just shortly before that time, and they had driven the fighting Japanese back into the hills or away from that. So all that we had to contend with was sniper fire and a few holdouts and things like that. So we, again, didn't, the combat in Manila had happened before we got there with MacArthur returning.
Luckily for you guys,
Yeah,
I guess.
we were very fortunate for the timing that we got there after the big fighting had started. But there were still holdouts. There was a Quezon city that just outside of Manila, where there was a big group of Japanese that were holed up and wouldn't surrender, and it took a while for that little pocket to be finally cleaned out. So it was, but the ruins there were incredible. And
what were your impressions of
Pardon?
the Philippines? What was your sensory impressions of the Philippines at the time?
Well, at the time, it was so hot and humid, it was so uncomfortable, and you had to take Adabrin all the time to keep from getting malaria.
Yeah.
One of the first sites that I saw and sketched was this ruins of a very large church. It's hard to tell you the size here, but this was a holdout that the Japanese had barricaded with the burned out cars and corrugated sheet metal and stuff in their last stand, and that was not too far from where we set up camp the first time. So I went out to sketch that, and that was quite an impressive view with the Christ in the center. So it was sort of an emotional time to land there and see everything was in tremendous ruins. Hardly anything was left standing anywhere. But the Filipinos were very friendly, and they knew we were there for them. This was another sketch that I did there of the ruins at that time, the burned out bark and stuff. These were a couple that I exhibited in art show in Manila before I left. But this was the first quarters that we experienced in the bombed out building after we landed, and I had a canvas cot and a few shipping crates and mosquito netting, and we filled in this burned out building or bombed out building, and that became our headquarters because it had been a factory before. We set up shop in that area and got to work doing what we were sent to do. I became, let's see, where is that sketch? Pardon me.
Oh, it's fine.
Oh, this is a series. Let me put these down. We opened a sign shop here it says 618th OBAM Ordnance Base Armament Maintenance Battalion Sign Shop Service Center, and I ended up having a lot of Filipinos work in the sign shop for me, and these were two of my top friends that I got to know quite well. And this is a picture of me sketching one of my sign painters, who happened to be this particular gentleman, Luis Bernardo. So he was one of my sign painters that we employed.
Very striking features.
And the other one on that photo is this gentleman, Mike Warren. So we became close friends, and we did a lot of work together at that place.
What were your working materials and conditions like?
I didn't have a large, extensive supply of art supplies. I took along the basic stuff, carbon pencils, and I had a few watercolors, which you'll see later, but there was no place to really go out and get art supplies. Here was another sign painter, and here
you probably learned to be pretty efficient with your materials.
Right. This was one of the relatives of an older gentleman that came around. I thought he had a very wonderful face. Sketched him. Here's another sign person, and they sat around all day doing their sign work. A lot of them would squat on their haunches rather than sitting in chairs, which was the Filipino custom, just on the haunches and paint all day without sitting on chairs. This was a scene where we'd take our laundry to the Filipinos that were set up shop outside of the base, and we would help their economy a little bit. This, I also went to the local churches there soon after we landed, and got to experience some of the churches that were still standing, which weren't very many. And we developed a lot of times off when we weren't working with the USO. The USO was headquartered in one of these large hotels that was one of the few that were left standing in Manila, and I joined a singing group. We had a barbershop quartet, and I'm trying to find his. Well, first of all, let me show you. These are some of the people we had a 4-man tent, or it might have been a 6-man tent, but these were sketches I did of my roommates.
This one says Pinto.
In the that's Pinto. This one is D'Agostino. And this particular gentleman was John Knack, and he happened to be a voice teacher, and I ended up singing with him in a barbershop quartet for the USO. And we found this lady in the Philippines who had a somewhat bombed out house that was still standing that had a grand piano. So we'd go over to her home to practice, and we ended up performing in some of the shows for the GIs, like at New Year's and things like that. But it was an interesting time that we still found time to do music and art.
How long were you in Manila?
1 year and 2 days. We got there on April 11th, 45. We departed in arrived on 13th of May, and departed Manila March in 46. So 1945, and departing in March of 46 back to the United States.
What exactly was the division that you were with? It would be the U.S. Army
Ordnance Maintenance outfit that serviced all of the heavy guns and all of the wheeled vehicles and tracks and anything to do other than aircraft, and the Navy. But we did all the small arms, and we supplied. We also supplied munitions to the fighting forces. So it was a big operation. I'd like to show you a few more of the bombed out buildings that existed in Manila and the Philippines. It was a sort of a Spanish colonial architecture, but the buildings were like this one, for instance. They're just a total jumbled mass that had collapsed, and which was partially from the Japanese retreating and partially from our bombing, getting into the harbor. There's a churchyard.
How long prior to
another
you being
ruined
there?
church. Pardon?
When was this destruction wrought?
Well, mainly before we got there. MacArthur returned shortly before we arrived, and a lot of this was done in the 6 months before we got there. But this is a churchyard very close to where we had our headquarters. And this is a GI at rest with his gun.
Virgil, looking at this drawing, to me this is like the epitome of the South Pacific romanticized era of the soldier. Tell me about this particular one.
Well, This happened to be a soldier off of guard duty, and I saw the pose, and I really like figures and the way lines flow. Decided to make a quick sketch of him, and this is probably about a 20-minute sketch. You were asking me how I do this. Well, it's what your eye sees after a long training, and I usually start with a very light, just to get the quick flow of the figure, just very lightly. But then I start at the head and probably finish that complete thing. And this is not how everybody works, but I really start at one point and work down and gradually do the whole thing in with strokes. But first starting out with that light line to make sure the proportions are right, and then as I go along and see what's before me, it's just very quick sketches, and it's the way you use the chisel point of the pencil, whether it's a soft or hard line, and vary the contour of it. So it's a quick sketch. In fact, this is a sketch that an artist friend of mine on the ship did of me doing a sketch. So that's what I looked like doing it. I was probably leaning against something or maybe just standing there, but the sketches usually go pretty quick. This happens to be a figure that I did, a real quick sketch. We had a USO that was pretty active in Manila in the Philippines and had a lot of off-duty things for soldiers to do, and one was a life drawing class that I would attend. So this is one of the sketches that I did on my off time for that. So that was...
Tell me about Manila.
Well, Manila was on the bay. This is a watercolor painting I did of the Manila fishermen down at the bay. It was basically a harbor town that was terribly damaged by the war, and hardly little of the infrastructure was left. So it was a beautiful place with a lot of palm trees and a lot of water, a lot of sun. It was hot and humid, which I did not like too much. Mm-hmm. But the people were very friendly to the United States. They knew what we had done for them, and were very friendly, very wonderful people, and we got to know some of them, and like the woman that we practiced at her house with the piano and various, and all the sign painters were great to work with. They were just very, very friendly, warm people.
Now, you were doing this as part of your official duties,
Mm-hmm.
as an artist for the, or was that just the sign shop, and this was your own private?
The sign shop. This was my own private enterprise, and I, not a lot of people saw a lot of this stuff until we had the art exhibit in Manila, which I showed you this ruin in the beginning. But I entered a few contests or a couple art exhibits in Manila that some of this work was shown. In fact, I think that sketch of the soldier was one of them too. But we did have an art group that was pretty active. I got to know a few people there, so it was inspirational because I came from the small town with a lot of this and had never traveled much in the world before at all. So would you like to hear about my experience with one of the significant things? This is a typical house, shack that the Filipinos lived in, because so much was destroyed. It's all built out of bombed out corrugated metal and so forth. This is just a community group that I sketched. But I alluded to the fact that one of the interesting times was at the right after the atom bombs were dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We knew that the war was going to pretty much come to an end, we hoped. And at that time, I was asked by the company commander to design a seal, an embossing seal that could be sent to the Missouri to be used in the signing of the peace treaty by MacArthur and Hirohito. And I didn't think a lot about it at that time, being a 19-year-old, but I did that, and it was shipped. This is the seal. You can't see it because it's not in color, but the embossing around here it says Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces official. Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, and that was used to sign the peace treaty.
Put this up here.
Okay.
So this was the actual seal that was used.
We shipped it off to the Missouri for all intent and purposes. I
You
think
never found out if it was used?
I never found out if it was used. I sure hope so, and I think so. Someday I'd like to look at that document, but I was told it was, and we finished it. So there was an article about this that John Colson wrote for the Aspen Times, and that was talked about here at that time. But unfortunately, I don't know what. We assume it was used. I think that it was probably used, and because I never got recognition by it from the Army, but this is a little bit better picture of it here. I assume that the commanders and the people higher up probably got an award for shipping it out. But however, I did get a what they call rest and recuperation, which was R&R, which is a week up in the mountains of Baguio, which was a summer resort for all of the Filipinos to get out of the heat. It was about, I think, about an 8,000-foot mountain, so rising sheer from the ocean. It was pretty spectacular. So
you never heard if that was your official reward for doing this?
No.
But for some reason, you only got R&R after doing this.
Yep. I got that, and there were a few.
What do you guys do on R&R? What do? You just go?
Well, I spend my time sketching. I don't recall about it, but there weren't many people that I knew that went with me, so it was pretty much a lone thing. And I was fascinated by the local. They call them the war and army. So they'd requisition an army, find an army hat or a jacket, and so it was quite a colorful place. And I remember the market. They sold dogs for meat. They raised dogs and ate the dogs. So it was a different kind of experience.
Yeah.
So that was sort of a different time. But I, again, sketched and painted. I'm looking for...
So should you be out there and have any knowledge about whether this was the actual stamp used, please get in touch with Virgil Simon. He'd be
have to find out sometime. This
interested to know.
This was a sketch done up in Baguio, and it had been an ammunition dump for the Japanese Army, and there were a lot of munitions lying around, and it was bombed and burned out, and all that was left standing up on top of this mountain were a lot of chimneys from the homes up there. So these are couple of sketches I did at that time, and this one is a typical one of the church up top of the mountain and the typical shacks just like down in Manila. And this was a quick watercolor that I did of just sort of the mountainous feeling and up on top of this place, which I enjoyed it much better than the hot Manila. This was another bomb.
Here's a question: Did anyone know you were doing these kinds of pieces of art? Were there any magazines or anything at home interested in your work?
No, I never really had an exhibit of all this work. There were people in the Army that saw what I was doing, but I never had this is the most comprehensive showing I've ever had. Otherwise, it was always piecemeal of a few pieces that people would see. But and I have a huge amount of other work that you aren't even seeing here. But
Virgil came to this interview with about 4 boxes of paintings and drawings.
This is a watercolor of a courtyard close to where we had our base Army Maintenance Center, a church in the background. And here again is Manila Bay. This happened to be an old shipwreck from early times, not a modern one, but that was a watercolor at that particular time.
Did you have enough supplies to work with?
For some reason, I seem to not run out of supplies. I had plenty. I came across with a lot of my favorite Wolf carbon pencils that I had a whole stack with me, and they did last for the year that I was overseas at that time. This was a photograph of how we lived in Manila. We had a tent city It was a bunch of wooden platforms, and then the canvas above, and open air all around with mosquito netting, because the mosquitoes were very prevalent. This is the typical
Ox team.
beast of burden that was their work, that did all of their farming work for them, not horses. It was they call them water buffaloes, caribou. Here's one I forgot. This is Pinto again, and this is another person that lived in the tent with me. Whoop, time to go down.
I think we filled up the easel.
I think that's it.
So that would basically be the sketchings of your time in war.
Right.
Tell
Overseas.
me about when you heard about the bomb.
Well, we had great hopes that this was the end of the whole thing, and we'd all be going home soon, and it proved to be true. But what we heard about it was so devastating that we felt that this must be the end, close to the end of the war. And at that time, I was offered to be an Army. They saw enough of my work that I was offered to be an Army war correspondent in the Pacific Theater, but I had to sign up for another year. But all I could think about was going back and seeing my new wife that I hadn't spent time with, so I refused that position, although it would have been a very rewarding one, but I'm glad I made the choice that I did. But
you might have ended up a journalist instead of...
Who knows? Total change.
Tell me about your, I guess, the end of your time in the Army. Were you shipped back home on a transport ship?
Yeah, we were shipped. I'm looking for something here. I'm sorry. I'm so disorganized, I guess. But we were shipped back home on a transport. But we came the direct. And instead of taking over a month to get there like we did before, it took about 24 days. And got back to San Francisco, and then back to, I was discharged in Fort Leavenworth at the time, and then came home to Burlington, Iowa to see my wife after these years.
Did she know that you were coming home?
Yeah, at that time, we corresponded a lot. There was no telephone like there is now, no instant messages and that kind of stuff, but I wrote, in the beginning of our marriage, I wrote every day. Then it's up down to maybe once a week. But I wrote home quite a bit. Still have a stack of letters I haven't looked through, but might tell some more things.
Yeah.
It was so great to get home and see everybody. And fortunately, her brothers came through the war and returned home. No one was killed in her side of the family, or my brothers came back from the service also. So we were dental captain in the Navy and served aboard aircraft carriers. So that was a big event for us.
We talked earlier about your brother that was in the service in the Philippines, who you went to go find.
Oh yeah,
Tell me that story.
We didn't
You'd never
elaborate on it. We, as I said, I knew what his outfit number was. He was a captain in the infantry. So in Manila, when I saw that Jeep go by with that number, I thought, oh my gosh, my brother must be here. So I got rides with all the Army personnel and going back and forth, and I hitched a ride to his company command and found out that he was not there, but he was in the hospital. And so I hitchhiked a ride to his hospital and saw him for the first time in the Manila hospital, and I'm wondering where I have, with all this, can you stop the camera a minute?
Yeah, we can stop tape and we'll come back
to
me find Virgil's sketching of his brother.
Yeah.
So earlier in our talk, we discussed the fact that you had, because of a sickness in your family and your mother dying, at a young age you had been taken away by an aunt and had never met siblings,
right.
Because you were the youngest. You had a brother who was on the same island as you, the same part of the service, and you tracked him down into a hospital.
Right.
And this is the hospital?
This is the hospital that I hitchhiked to from his command headquarters. They told me he was in the hospital, so I hitchhiked, walked in the room for the first time, saw my brother on the bed, and fortunately it was just a nosebleed. Nothing major, but he was in the infantry and was due to be shipped out for some further fighting. Japanese. So we had a little time together before he was shipped out, and I did this sketch of my brother.
If you can see this sketch on the left, this is Virgil before the war, a self-portrait, and this is his basically long-lost brother.
So we looked at each other and said, my gosh, we look a lot alike, which we did. So it was great to see him. That was Larry.
How much time did you have to spend with Larry?
I think just about a week. This was another sketch that I did of him. I did those 2 sketches of him before he was shipped off.
You guys look like movie stars. Very good-looking group of guys.
He had hair, yeah. He's a wonderful guy. I really got to know him and love him after that.
Okay, so it was time to come home. The war's over.
Come home and the war was over. Oh, is it not working? Okay.
So it's time. The war's over. It's
war's
time
over.
to come home.
One of the first things that we did is to have a family reunion. So I got to meet my other brother, and this is a picture I did of him. We met at his home in King City, Missouri, where he was a veterinarian for large animals, basically all the farmers around there, and some small too. But we met Larry and Melvin and my sister Norma. I don't have a picture of her here, but and at that time they had some children, and we didn't have children at that time yet. But so we got to be reunited as a family, and we've kept in touch as much as possible ever since.
And reuniting with your wife, who you just married and then got sent off to war, and I guess you were gone for about 2 years.
Yeah, a little over 2.5 years.
And were you able to pick it right back up where if you?
Well, we had to get down to the business of where are we going to live and start schooling. I had never finished anything other than high school, and I had planned to be a fine artist and do nothing but painting and drawing the rest of my life, which doesn't make much money. But one of the fortunate things that happened during the war in Manila, I met this gentleman, Robert Headley, who was involved with the USO and I think also the Red Cross. And he saw the paintings and the things that I was doing there. So as I was back home in Burlington, Iowa, signing up for the GI Bill to go to the Art Institute of Chicago to start my fine art career, he gave me a call and said, how would you like to come to Chicago and be a product designer? I had no idea what a product designer was, but he told me a little bit about it, and I decided to give it a chance. So we ended up going to Chicago. Unfortunately, my wife had a grandmother who had a large apartment on the north shore of Chicago along the lake, and rental places were just impossible to find. They were rationed, but she shared her apartment, half of it or part of it, with us. So we set up headquarters there at her place, and I went to art school at the Chicago Art Institute for a while. Took painting and sculpture and all that kind of stuff. But I started with this company, and it happened to be a real good match. They were one of the most progressive design and architectural companies in Chicago at that time. So I was exposed to...
Which is like the architecture capital of the world, right?
Yeah,
Chicago.
A lot of great stuff. And this particular company had a lot of wealthy clients, and we ended up, I ended up doing architectural work even though I wasn't an architect. I did all kinds of furniture design. I designed lamps and even sterling silver tableware and chairs, couches, tables, as well as showrooms for the merchandise mart there. But it was a real great learning experience, not only in that, but in what I was hired for was product design, and we designed refrigerators and stove for Hot Point and GE and General Electric X-ray equipment, International Harvester tractors, and so I got a real education at a great place. And because of this guy seeing my work out there. Got started. In fact, what happened is that I was more intrigued with what was happening at work than at the Art Institute, so I never finished the Art Institute. I went nights and weekends and spent full time on the job, and it was a very demanding job, but a lot of opportunities. So that's how I got started there. And from that particular job, I ended up going into a point-of-purchase display design field, which it was again design, but we designed and manufactured displays for all the
Maybe
well-known
like
companies.
Storefronts kind of thing?
No, not storefronts. It was all, one of our major clients that we got a lot of return from because we designed and sold the displays was a lot of the breweries. Did a lot of work for Coors, Budweiser, all those people. And I didn't drink and I didn't smoke, but also another big client was Reynolds Tobacco Company. There we designed a lot of the store fixtures inside of the stores. But it was a very creative, long career, and I became a major stockholder and ran the creative department, which we had a model shop that we would make submissions. We didn't sell our designs, but we would make submissions. If people liked them, they would buy them, and we'd make our money on what we made on being able to manufacturing them at a profit. And one of the things that sort of ties in with this whole thing is that at that company, we had a model shop employee. His name was George Takahashi. And the story with him was that he was a kamikaze pilot for the Japanese. He was an American that had been trapped over there when the war started, and they recruited him to stay and join the army. So he
never got to be a kamikaze.
Well, he was training and made some runs that were faulty and had to come back to base. And that time the war ended because of the bomb. So he ended up in the States and working with me or for me in the model shop.
Did you hold any resentment?
Not at all. He was a great guy. We got along great. And the nice thing about it is that we were the same age, and he retired at the same time that I did when we were bought out by one of the largest companies, advertising companies in the world, Omnicom. So we spent a few times. We retired together, and he said, "Virg, sometimes I'll call you up, and maybe we can go back to Japan and with us." So sure enough, he did. He and his wife Hideo called us, and it was about a 3 weeks time. Joe, my wife, and I decided to go back with them to Japan, and it turned out we were the only Americans in it. It was a group of Japanese going back to see Hiroshima. They'd all lived in that area and around it, and they were going back to pay respects and see the museum. And so it was such a meaningful trip that we experienced, getting to understand the Japanese and that whole period, and there was no resentment. We were glad we did it. It was wonderful.
Did that experience change your opinion about fighting with Japan, or was it just that you now understood each other a little better?
The people who are doing the fighting and the people that are left are totally different, even though,
That's true.
It's a totally different experience. And they were wondering, well, why did we bomb? Why did we do this to you as much as why did we do this to them? It was to end the war. I feel the atom bomb saved a lot of lives in the long run, although it's not nice to think that. But we saw the horrors of the destruction. We went to the Hiroshima War Museum and saw the effect of the disaster of people's imprints plastered on the concrete. The shadow when the bomb came, it was a different color than the background. The heat was so intense. And his father was saved. They lived in the shadow of a large hill away on the outskirts of Hiroshima. So his father survived, but they had all kinds of people coming through, dying on their steps. We heard so many stories of what happened at that time. But that was an interesting experience based on the war. Another one that is a little bit related to the war in a way, it's also involves the Japanese. When I worked for the display design company, I came up with a patented process that would show multiple pictures on one piece of film. It was a mechanical way of printing that was a little bit unusual, and that we had some exhibits in the States, and the Japanese came over and saw it. and they wanted us to license them to reproduce this over there in Japan, and we signed one of the largest printing companies in the world, Topan Printing Company. So George, the model maker, as Japanese, we went over with the boss of our company and myself to explain the process several times to this big printing company in Japan, in Tokyo. And got to know a lot of the Japanese really well, and just had some wonderful experiences with them. Again, this was a connection to the war.
Let's quickly, let's focus on your family for a little
Sure.
bit. You had some children?
Well, Corby, my wife and I had two children. One was the daughter, Leslie Jones Simon, and she was born 11 months after my return to the U.S. on February 20, 1947. And then we had a son, Jay Stiefel Simon, who was born August 2nd, 1948. Leslie has a daughter, Heather Starr Callis, and she was born in 1976. Now, Heather has a daughter recently, Savannah Callis, our first and only great-granddaughter. She was born November 11th, 2006, last year. So we see a lot of them and do a lot of babysitting, which is great. And Leslie was an art teacher in the public schools in Rockford, Illinois for quite a while. And Heather has her own dance studio here in Aspen. Over 200 students from 5 years to high school, and now she's starting a few adult classes, so it's a very active organization.
Wow.
She teaches all forms of dance, or most forms of dance, lyrical, ballet, jazz, and tap, and also hip-hop. So we have a lot of fun watching her progress. Son Jay has a daughter, Julia Murphy Simon, and she was born June 26th in 1992. Jay is a professional photographer with a studio in Denver, and he specializes in architectural and nature photography and other types too for companies and corporations. Julia is a student. She's going to her first year of high school in the fall, and she's studying piano, and she's active in school activities, chorus, cheerleading, swimming, and volleyball teams, and all of that kind of things. But last year she was selected to be on 2 people-to-people student ambassador programs, and foreign trips. Went to Europe last year, and this year she's going to Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. So that's going to be quite an interesting experience for her. All I can say, we remain in close contact with all the family members, and we are certainly blessed with wonderful children. So we've had a great life with our family.
Yeah.
Corby, earlier you mentioned that if I could hum a few bars of something, and I was at a loss to figure out what to do, but since then I've thought, well, maybe what was sung at the recent Memorial Day service in Aspen was quite fitting. So maybe here goes a few bars.
Oh,
Let
please.
there be peace on earth.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as our Father, brothers all are we. Let me walk with my brother in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow. To take each moment, to live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Well, that was more than just a few bars, but that was the song that I thought was pretty fitting.
Thank you, Virgil.
Thank you, Corby.
Let's spend the next maybe 10 minutes before we wrap up here talking about your connection with Aspen. How did you come here?
Well, we had a very active school. We started skiing, actually it started this way. We started skiing on the little 200 and 300 foot high hills back outside of Chicago. Mainly night skiing. We learned to ski on the ice, but we did that with the kids. We enjoyed it. And we started branching out. My son ended up to be president of the high school ski group. And we went to various places around the Midwest, and then finally we graduated. We came out. One of our big trips, and we were chaperones always, was out to Ski Tip Ranch in Dillon, Colorado, the Arapahoe Basin. So we had some great times with a whole bunch of kids there, and then we went from there to Breckenridge and to Vail and different places. But in the meantime, my daughter started dating a person they both went to CU, Colorado University. And he happened to be the son of the superintendent of schools here in Aspen, Dick Lee. His name was Greg Lee. So she came over here with him once, and I came along and fell in love with Aspen. We started skiing here. And at that time, things were so different. I remember calling back my wife. Both my son and daughter were here skiing with me. She was back home, and I said, "Oh, we found this wonderful condominium. Do you think maybe we ought to buy one?" So things were pretty tough then. I had to borrow an insurance, but we bought the first little blue roof condo at Snowmass Village.
You told me earlier how much for, and it was shocking.
It's shocking. It was
hard to scrape together at the time, but how much was it?
It was hard at the time, $28,000 fully furnished, but it was a 900 square foot condo. But we did do that, and we spent so many wonderful years here with all the college people who would come, and the floor would be filled with sleeping bags and people skiing, and had a lot of fun with our kids doing that. But that was a good move. So that started us here in Aspen, and then I won't get too detailed, but our daughter, who started here with us, married a person here, and she went over with him, and that was the beginning of the Telluride ski area, and they bought a house there before the ski area opened. So we moved along with them and skied over there, and ended up investing in some property there, and thought we were going to live there for a while. But as we were getting older, we decided, well, Aspen has a hospital, and there's more art and music. At that time, I was doing some more involved in the music here, and decided to come over here, and we built another home up on the Divide area. But we still have the little condo that our granddaughter is living in now.
Tell me about your passion for music.
Well,
maybe spend another 5 minutes on this.
Okay, the music all started back in grade school and high school. As I think I told you that we had a very wonderful music program back in high school with a large orchestra and choirs that did operettas and all that kind of stuff. And my wife was a very accomplished musician. In fact, she went to Interlochen and played first chair bass and first solos for Leonard Bernstein at Interlochen. So she was a real great singer and bass viol player. I was sort of so-so, but I enjoyed it. But that started us, and then we did a lot of singing in churches back in Chicago, and later we moved to Downers Grove, and then back to Glenview, Illinois. Is where we spent most of our time, where the kids went to most of their schooling in Glenview, Illinois. But there was a wonderful choir there, and we did a lot of work there. But coming out here, I got started singing the Messiah every Christmas with Ray Adams, and in my older years, when I retired at 65, I decided to take voice lessons again and try to improve what I was doing. So I ended up being some of the bass solos for Ray's Messiah groups, and then when his group got a little more involved, we founded the Aspen Choral Society and became more involved in doing year-round music, and we were fortunate enough to do productions in Harris Hall. First one was the Mozart Requiem that I did the bass solos on, but later Ray is our local resident Mozart, and as a composer it was a wonderful experience. So he's composed various large-scale works that...
World premieres.
Yeah, world premieres there that I did some of the solos work again, and
I was talking to someone this weekend about
wonderful.
How, sorry to interrupt, about how unique Aspen is. We have things like our own conductor.
Right.
You know, that's not common for every
it
town. You've helped Ray a lot, I think.
Yeah, as a group, we did a lot to make sure that things go on would perpetuate itself. We still struggle to raise funds every year, but it's been a struggle that was worthwhile, and we had a lot of assistance from the thrift shop ladies again, and the town of Aspen and other people here. But it's a wonderful organization. Still singing.
Do you have it in you to sing a few bars of?
Oh, can't do that now.
To be in the mood.
No, I don't. I wouldn't know what to sing. But come again at the Messiah. That'll be our next performance before next spring.
And if you've ever seen the pamphlets that are handed out for any of the Choral Society performances, you generally draw.
I've done a lot
cover.
of the artwork, portrait of Ray and portrait of Mozart and the different composers that we've from time to time. So I've been involved in the graphic works of the Choral Society and still do. But it's a wonderful thing to experience here. So that's one of the reasons we like Aspen.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to leave off. I would ask if there's any other memories or things that you feel that we may have skipped over that you...
I suppose I should read my notes, but let's not do that. I just want to say that I thank you and Dick Merritt and the whole organization that gives us wonderful opportunities for so many GIs to tell what has happened, because I haven't talked about this just like other people for years. Haven't shown a collection of my work at all, except just sporadically. But in all this time, I'm married this wonderful person for 62 years now, and
Wow.
and think back, I just think I'm very fortunate with what I've been able to accomplish and what we've done together in this life with our family, and thank our wonderful kids for being part of this life, and all the people that have helped us. I remember my Uncle Harry back in Burlington, Iowa, when we had no funds to live on and all. He was very helpful, but so many people through our life have been a part of our lives, and it's been a great experience.
Well, I know that the community of Aspen appreciates you guys, and
Thank you.
and that you're well respected around here, and we thank you for participating, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Corby. Thank you for
From
leading this interview. I
You're
appreciate
welcome. This is from the Roaring Fork Veterans History
it. Wonderful.
Project.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.